During the most taxing endurance exercise at Fort Bradley, Eliza Shaw, 22, abruptly stopped jogging, and her fellow recruits erupted in laughter. This was the reserved girl who hardly talked beyond a whisper and seemed to give up when things got difficult. Then, 300 yards ahead, Sergeant Rodriguez fell. His huge, 200-pound body fell to the ground. Others paused, but Eliza moved with deadly accuracy, carrying the unconscious sergeant 3 miles to the finish line. Without breaking stride and lifting him over her shoulders in the ideal combat extraction form, that's Shadow Squad technique. Where did she learn that? The drill commander mumbled, his face turning pale. Before we continue, please press the subscribe button to brighten my day and leave a comment letting me know where you are viewing from. As Eliza Shaw laced on her old racing shoes for the third time, the morning sun created deep shadows over the Fort Bradley obstacle course. Despite her best efforts to be composed, her fingers trembled a little.
Ow.
Her normal issue PT outfit was scratchy on her skin, still wet from the previous night's anxious sweats when she had been unable to fall asleep at all. The day that separates the wheat from the chaff is the foreboding title given by their drill instructors to the 47 other recruits who stretched and readied themselves around her, performing complex warm-up exercises that appeared to be more for show than purpose. Private Marcus Chen bounced on the balls of his feet close by, his confidence radiating like fire from a furnace. He exclaimed, "Hey, Shaw," with a grin that fell short of his eyes. "Try to keep up today, will you? Some of us actually want to make it through basic training." His words carried the casual cruelty that had become commonplace during their 6 weeks at Fort Bradley. Each recruit desperately trying to prove their worth while simultaneously tearing down anyone they perceived as weak. Eliza's response was barely audible, a soft, "I'll do my best," that seemed to amuse Chen and the cluster of recruits who had gathered around him like moths drawn to a particularly bright flame. She had learned early in her time at Fort Bradley that drawing attention to herself rarely led to positive outcomes. So she had cultivated an almost ghost-like presence, moving through the days with quiet efficiency, while others made noise and demanded recognition. Drill Sergeant Martinez appeared at the front of the formation like a force of nature. His weathered face bearing the scars of 2 decades in the military, and his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen combat in 3 different theaters of operation. His presence immediately silenced the nervous chatter among the recruits, each of them snapping to attention with varying degrees of success. Martinez's eyes swept across the formation with the intensity of a hawk surveying potential prey lingering for just a moment longer on certain faces, including Eliza's. "Today's exercise is simple in concept, but brutal in execution," Martinez announced, his words cutting through the morning air like shards of glass. "You will run 12 miles through varied terrain, including hills, streams, and obstacles designed to test every muscle fiber in your pathetic excuse for bodies. The first 22 cross the finish line will receive a weekend pass. The last 10 will spend their weekend scrubbing latrines with CRA toothbrushes." He paused for effect, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the group like a heavy blanket. "But here's the twist that will separate the real soldiers from the pretenders. At random intervals throughout the course, we have placed scenarios that will test your ability to think under pressure and act with honor." The drill sergeant's explanation continued as he paced back and forth in front of the formation, his boots creating small clouds of dust with each step. Eliza found herself studying his movements, noting the way he carried himself with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of controlled violence. There was something in his bearing that reminded her of instructors from another time, another place, though she quickly pushed those thoughts aside before they could fully form. "Some of you will encounter fellow soldiers in distress," Martinez continued, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. "Your response to these situations will be noted and will factor into your final evaluation. Remember, a soldier who abandons his comrades to save his own skin is not a soldier at all. He is a coward wearing AI uniform he does not deserve." The silence that followed his words was profound, broken only by the distant sound of other training units going through their morning routines. As the recruits lined up at the starting line, Lisa found herself positioned near the back of the pack, which suited her perfectly. From this vantage point, she could observe the others without drawing unwanted attention to herself. Chen had positioned himself at the front. Naturally, along with several other recruits who had appointed themselves as the unofficial leaders of their training platoon, their confidence was palpable, radiating from them in waves that seemed to energize some recruits while intimidating others. Private Jennifer Walsh, a former college track star who had joined the military to prove something to herself, and perhaps to a father who had never believed in her abilities, stretched her hamstrings with the methodical precision of someone who understood the science of athletic performance. Her presence at Fort Bradley had been something of a mystery to the other recruits, many of whom came from backgrounds where military service was either a family tradition or a last resort. Walsh graduated summa cum laude from a prestigious university and could have pursued any number of careers, yet here she was subjecting herself to the same grueling training as everyone else. The starting signal came not with a whistle or a gunshot, but with Martinez's booming voice shouting, "Move out." The mass of bodies surged forward like water bursting through a dam. Each recruit fighting for position while trying to find their optimal pace for the long journey ahead. Eliza held back slightly, allowing the initial chaos to sort itself out before settling into a steady rhythm that felt sustainable over the long haul. The first mile passed through relatively flat terrain, giving the faster runners an opportunity to establish their dominance. While the rest of the pack found their natural positions, Chin had taken an early lead, his form impressive as he bounded across the uneven ground with the confidence of someone who had trained for this moment his entire life. Walsh ran in a pack of 5 other strong runners about 50 yards behind Chen, her stride efficient and economical, conserving energy for the challenges that lay ahead. Eliza maintained her position in the middle of the pack, her breathing steady and controlled despite the increasing pace set by the leaders. She had learned long ago that endurance was not just about physical conditioning, but about mental discipline and the ability to remain calm under pressure. Her mind wandered as she ran, touching briefly on memories that she quickly suppressed, focusing instead on the rhythm of her footfalls and the sensation of air flowing in and out of her lungs. The second mile introduced the first significant hill, a steep incline that immediately separated the well-conned conditioned runners from those who had relied more on enthusiasm than preparation. Several recruits began to struggle almost immediately, their breathing becoming labored as they fought against gravity and their own limitations. Eliza maintained her steady pace, neither pushing to catch the leaders nor falling back, with the strugglers occupying a middle ground that seemed to suit her temperament perfectly. As they crested the hill and began the descent on the other side, the course took them through a dense wooded area where the canopy blocked much of the morning sun and created a cathedral-like atmosphere. The change in environment seemed to affect different runners in various ways, with some finding the cooler air refreshing, while others struggled with the uneven terrain and reduced visibility. It was during the third mile that they encountered the first scenario Martinez had warned them about. A figure in military fatigues lay motionless beside the trail, apparently unconscious and in need of assistance. The scenario was clearly artificial, but it was designed to test the recruits' priorities and decision-making abilities under pressure. Chen, still in the lead, barely slowed as he passed the figure, perhaps calculating that stopping would cost him his position and potentially his weekend pass. Walsh and her group also passed by after a brief hesitation, though one of them, Private Rodriguez from Texas, broke away from the group to check on the fallen soldier. His action caused a ripple effect among the other runners, with some stopping to help while others continued on, each making a split-second decision that would later be evaluated by their instructors. Eliza slowed as she approached the scenario, her instincts telling her that this was more than just a simple test of priorities. Something about the way the figure was positioned seemed wrong, too artful, too deliberate. She knelt beside the prone form and quickly determined that while the scenario was indeed artificial, it was meant to simulate a specific type of injury that would require particular care in movement and transportation. Without hesitation, she began the process of preparing the figure for transport using techniques that seemed to flow from her muscle memory rather than her conscious training.
Other recruits who had stopped to help watched in amazement as Eliza demonstrated a level of competence that seemed far beyond what they had learned in their basic first aid classes. Her movements were precise and confident, each action building upon the previous one in a sequence that spoke of extensive training and practical experience. When she finally lifted the simulated casualty and began moving down the trail, several of the other recruits fell in behind her, apparently content to let her take the lead in this portion of the exercise. The fourth and fifth miles took the group through increasingly challenging terrain, including a stream crossing that required careful navigation to avoid injury and a series of natural obstacles that tested balance in CAS. Agility as much as endurance. Eliza had fallen back in the overall standings due to her stop at the first scenario, but she seemed unconcerned with her position, focusing instead on maintaining her steady pace and helping other recruits navigate the more technical sections of the course. By the sixth mile, the field had spread out considerably, with Chen and two other strong runners maintaining a significant lead while a large group of runners occupied the middle positions. Several recruits had already dropped out, either due to injury or exhaustion, and were being transported back to base by support vehicles that shadowed the exercise. The attrition rate was higher than usual, which Martinez noted with apparent satisfaction as he monitored the progress from various checkpoints along the route. The seventh mile introduced a new challenge in the form of a simulated combat zone, complete with smoke grenades and recorded sound effects designed to create a stressful environment. Recruits were required to low-crawl under wire obstacles while maintaining forward progress toward the next checkpoint. This portion of the exercise favored smaller, more agile participants, and several of the leaders found their advantages reduced as they struggled with the technical requirements of the obstacles. Eliza moved through this section with surprising grace, her body seeming to flow around and under obstacles with minimal wasted motion. Other recruits watched her progress with growing interest, beginning to suspect that there was more to the quiet girl from Nebraska than met the eye. Her techniques were too polished, too professional for someone who had supposedly learned everything at Fort Bradley over the past 6 weeks. Private David Kim, a former computer programmer who had joined the military after losing his job during a corporate restructuring, found himself running alongside Eliza as they emerged from the simulated combat zone. His curiosity finally got the better of him, and he attempted to strike up a conversation despite the physical demands of the exercise. "Where did you learn to move like that?" he asked between labored breaths. His own inexperience with this type of physical activity evident in his struggling pace. Eliza's response was characteristically brief. A simple "just picked it up along the way" that revealed nothing while seeming to answer the question. Kim sensed that there was much more to the story. But before he could pursue the matter further, they encountered the second major scenario of the day. This time the situation was more complex and realistic. Sergeant Rodriguez, a massive man who served as one of the assistant drill instructors, lay collapsed beside the trail, apparently having suffered some type of medical emergency during his supervision of the exercise. Unlike the previous scenario, this appeared to be genuine, with Rodriguez's face flushed and his breathing shallow and irregular. Several recruits had gathered around him, but none seemed to know how to proceed. The situation presented a significant dilemma for the participants. Rodriguez easily weighed 200 pounds and was positioned more than 3 miles from the finish line over difficult terrain. Attempting to carry him would be physically demanding under the best of circumstances. And doing so while already fatigued from 7 miles of running seemed nearly impossible for most of the recruits. Chin arrived at the scene moments after Eliza and immediately began calculating the cost of getting involved. His lead had been reduced during the combat zone, and stopping now would likely cost him any chance of finishing in the top 20. He hesitated for several long seconds, torn between his competitive instincts and his sense of duty, before finally deciding to continue toward the finish line. His decision drew disapproving looks from some of the other recruits, but others seemed to understand his reasoning. Walsh arrived with her diminished group shortly thereafter and faced the same dilemma. She had maintained a strong position throughout the race and was well positioned to earn one of the coveted weekend passes, but leaving Rodriguez behind would violate everything she believed about military service and personal honor. After a brief consultation with her companions, she decided to stay and help. Though none of them seemed to have a clear plan for how to transport a 200B unconscious man over such a distance. It was at this moment that Eliza Shaw stepped forward and changed everything. Without hesitation or apparent effort, she positioned herself beside Rodriguez and began the process of lifting him into a carrying position. The other recruits watched in amazement as she hoisted the massive sergeant across her shoulders in a fireman's carry that demonstrated both perfect technique and incredible strength. The movement was so smooth and professional that several of the observers initially thought it must be easier than it looked. Rodriguez was not a small man with a thick muscular build of someone who had spent 20 years maintaining military fitness standards. The fact that Eliza, who was at least 50 pounds lighter than the man she was carrying, could lift him at all was impressive. The fact that she did so with such apparent ease suggested a level of training and conditioning that went far beyond what any of them had suspected. "I've got him," she said simply, adjusting Rodriguez's position on her shoulders to ensure maximum stability and minimum strain on both of them. Her breathing remained controlled and steady, showing no signs of the exertion that should have been evident after such a lift. The other recruits stared in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Walsh was the first to recover her voice, asking the question that was on everyone's mind. "Are you sure you can carry him the whole way? It's still 3 m to the finish line." Her concern was genuine, born from her own understanding of the physical demands involved in such an endeavor. She had trained at elite levels for years and knew the toll that carrying additional weight could take on the human body, especially over extended distances. Eliza's response was matter-of-fact, delivered without boasting or false bravado. "He needs medical attention, and this is the fastest way to get him there." With that simple statement, she began moving down the trail, carrying Rodriguez with the same steady pace she had maintained throughout the exercise. Her stride remained even and controlled, showing no signs of the additional burden she now carried. The other recruits fell in behind her, some out of genuine concern for Rodriguez, others out of curiosity about Eliza's capabilities, and still others because they were unsure what else to do in such an unusual box situation. The procession that formed resembled nothing so much as a military unit moving with purpose and coordination, despite the fact that none of them had trained together for such a scenario. As they moved through the 8th mile, Eliza's performance became even more remarkable. Not only was she maintaining her pace while carrying Rodriguez, but she was also navigating obstacles and uneven terrain with the skill of someone who had done this type of thing many times before. Her footwork was precise and calculated. Each step chosen to minimize the impact on both herself and her passenger while maintaining forward momentum. Kim, still running beside her when his own endurance allowed, attempted to offer assistance several times, but Eliza politely declined each offer. Her reasons were practical rather than prideful. She had Rodriguez positioned exactly where she needed him for optimal weight distribution and stability, and any attempt to share the load would likely disrupt the delicate ollie. Balance she had achieved. The 9th mile took them through another stream crossing, and this was where Eliza's skills truly shone. While other recruits struggled to maintain their footing on the slippery rocks while carrying only their own weight, Eliza navigated the crossing with Rodriguez still on her shoulders. Her movements careful but confident. She tested each step before committing her full weight, ensuring that both she and her passenger would remain dry and secure. Several of the recruits who had initially continued past the scenario began to reappear, having apparently reached some checkpoint where they learned about Rodriguez's condition and were ordered to return and assist. Chun was among them, his face showing a mixture of admiration and perhaps some regret about his earlier decision to continue alone. "Jesus Shaw," he said as he fell into step beside the group, his usual confidence replaced by genuine amazement. "Where did you learn to do that?" His question echoed the thoughts of everyone present, but Eliza seemed unwilling or unable to provide a satisfactory answer. "Just something you pick up," she replied. Her breathing still remarkably controlled despite having carried Rodriguez for more than a mile over challenging terrain. The known answer frustrated some of the other recruits, but it was becoming clear that Eliza was not inclined to share details about her background or training. The 10th mile brought them to another series of obstacles, including a rope climb and a wall that required teamwork to surmount. Under normal circumstances, these challenges would have been difficult enough for individuals carrying only their own weight. With Rodriguez unconscious and requiring constant care, the obstacles seemed nearly impossible. Once again, Eliza surprised everyone with her problem-solving abilities and technical skills. At the rope climb, she somehow managed to secure Rodriguez to her back in a way that allowed her to use both hands while ensuring his safety. Her climbing technique was flawless. Each movement economical and precise, and she reached the top of the obstacle in what seemed like record time given the circumstances. The wall presented a different challenge, requiring the cooperation of multiple recruits to lift Rodriguez to safety, while Eliza coordinated from above. Her instructions were clear and professional, delivered with the authority of someone accustomed to leading others in high-stress situations. The other recruits followed her directions without question, perhaps sensing that she knew exactly what she was doing, even if they didn't understand how. Walsh, who had been observing Eliza's performance with growing interest throughout the exercise, finally voiced what many of them were thinking. "You've done this before, haven't you? This isn't something you learned in basic training." Her statement was delivered without accusation, though with the curiosity of someone who recognized expertise when she saw it. Eliza's response was characteristically brief. "We all have things in our past that prepared us for this moment." The answer revealed nothing while acknowledging everything, a skill that suggested experience in deflecting inquiries about personal history. The 11th mile took them through the most challenging terrain of the entire course. A series of steep hills and rocky outcroppings that would have been difficult to navigate under optimal conditions. With Rodriguez still unconscious and requiring constant monitoring, the section seemed almost impossible. Several of the recruits suggested that they should wait for a rescue vehicle or call for additional assistance. But Eliza maintained that continuing forward was their best option for getting Rodriguez the medical attention he needed quickly. Her reasoning proved sound as they encountered a medical team at the 11 miles checkpoint who were able to provide immediate assistance. The paramedics who examined Rodriguez were impressed not only with the speed at which he had been transported, but also with the quality of care he had received during the journey. Eliza had somehow managed to monitor his vital signs and maintain his airway while carrying him over 3 miles of difficult terrain. Skills that suggested medical training as well as physical conditioning. As the medical team took over Rodriguez's care, loading him into a helicopter for transport to the base hospital, Eliza finally allowed herself to show some signs of fatigue. She sat heavily on a nearby rock, her shoulders sagging slightly as she finally released the tension she had maintained throughout the rescue. The other recruits gathered around her, their admiration and curiosity evident in their expressions. "That was incredible," Walsh said, her voice filled with genuine respect. "I've never seen anything like that." Her words seemed to speak for the entire group, all of whom had witnessed something that challenged their understanding of what was possible. Martinez appeared at the checkpoint as if summoned by some invisible signal, his weathered face showing an expression that none of the recruits had seen before. There was respect in his eyes as he looked at Eliza, mixed with something that might have been recognition or perhaps suspicion. He approached her with the careful deliberation of someone who was reassessing a previous evaluation. "Outstanding work, Shaw," he said, his voice carrying a tone of professional approval that he rarely used with recruits. It was a classic battle extraction method. He took a moment to examine her face as intently as if he were attempting to solve a conundrum. "Where specifically did you get those abilities?" Eliza calmly looked into his eyes, her face showing no signs of the thoughts that were going through her head. "I'm merely attempting to be the greatest soldier I can be. Sergeant in drill." Martinez appeared to be both satisfied and irritated by her statement, which was entirely uninformative and totally suitable. With Eliza surrounded by other recruits who were asking her questions and giving her accolades, the last mile to the finish line took on the feel of a triumph parade. Her usual modesty helped her avoid much of the attention, but it was obvious that her position in the group had shifted significantly. She was no longer the reserved young woman who hardly talked above a whisper. She had developed into a person deserving of respect and affection. Shun, who had at first written her off as weak, was one of the most effusive in his compliments. "I'm not sure how you achieved that, but I've never seen something so fierce." He spoke with the earnestness of someone who had learnt a valuable lesson about assuming things based only on looks. Captain Williams, the commanding officer of their training unit, met them as they crossed the finish line together, the whole group keeping formation behind Eliza even though they were under no duty to do so. Williams's look conveyed both delight and a deep interest in the recruit who had performed so brilliantly. It was clear that he had been briefed on the exercise's circumstances. With the formality of a superior commander speaking to a subordinate, he continued, "Miss Shaw, I know you did a great job today. That kind of leadership and technical skill under pressure is exactly what we're looking for in our soldiers." He paused, his eyes studying her face with the same intensity that Martinez had shown earlier. "I'd like to speak with you privately after you've had a chance to clean up and rest." The invitation was clearly not optional, delivered with the polite formality that military officers used when issuing orders disguised as requests. Eliza nodded her acceptance, her expression showing no surprise or concern about the impending interview. If anything, she seemed to have been expecting such a conversation. As the other recruits were dismissed to shower and prepare for the evening meal, several of them made a point of personally thanking Eliza for her leadership during the crisis. Their words were genuine and heartfelt, reflecting a fundamental shift in their perception of their quiet teammate. What had begun as a routine endurance exercise had become a defining moment that would be remembered and discussed for years to come. Walsh lingered after the others had departed, her expression showing both admiration and curiosity. "Whatever your story is," she said quietly, "I hope someday you'll trust us enough to share it. I don't believe your exceptional performance today was the result of luck or innate ability." Her observations, as someone who had trained at the highest levels and was able to spot skill when she saw it, were weighed heavily by her own experience. In typical fashion, Eliza's answer was subtle. "All of us are sometimes more capable than we think." Her tone conveyed deeper truths about human potential and the value of preparation and training, even though the phrase might have been interpreted as false modesty. Eliza thought about the day's events and their possible repercussions as she headed to the barracks for a much-needed base shower. By blending in with the other recruits and preventing her background from being discovered, she had been able to keep her cover for 6 weeks. Unquestionably, today's performance has blown that well-preserved secrecy. However, she had to decide between keeping her secret and possibly letting Rodriguez die or be gravely injured. It had been a simple choice. The training and conditioning she had endured over the years had really been based on one basic idea. First, the mission. However, individuals are most important. Rodriguez had devoted his professional life to training and mentoring new recruits, and he was a nice man. It would have been a violation of everything she held for to let him suffer subtly when she was capable of helping. After the tough workout, the shower felt amazing. The sweat and dust of 12 meters over difficult terrain are washed away by hot water. For the first time in hours, Eliza let herself really unwind as she stood beneath the stream. Sensation of the tension leaving muscles that had been overworked. Carrying Rodriguez caused her shoulders to ache, but it was a pleasant ache from muscles that had served their duty. The braid shower area gradually attracted more recruits. Discussions of the day's events and conjectures of Eliza's upbringing and skills dominated their chats. She listened with mild amusement to their theories, observing that some of them were quite close to the truth, but that their conclusions were entirely off the mark. It was interesting to see how people often make up stories to explain the inexplicable, especially if you were the one being speculated about. Word of her achievement had traveled throughout the training battalion by the time she came out of the shower area, feeling much more human and wearing new fatigues. Many recruits from different platoons made excuses to pass her barracks or hang around in places where they may get a glimpse of this mythical person because they had heard about the lady who had carried a 200-pound sergeant 3 miles without losing stride. Eliza was uneasy about the attention, not because she was inherently timid, but because operational security had always been hampered by visibility. The more people were aware of her skills, the more like it was that someone would begin to raise the appropriate concerns and possibly jeopardize the original purpose for which she had come to Fort Bradley. The austere battalion Crite headquarters, which represented the military's priority for function over form, housed Captain Williams's office. Eliza showed there exactly on schedule, her outfit spotless, her demeanor displaying the self-assurance and self-control that had somehow slipped away over the previous 6 weeks. She waited for permission to enter after knocking on the captain's door twice. From within, Comaine Shaw Williams screamed out with the fatigue of a career officer who had seen too much and slept too little. Standard military furniture and quotes were used to sparingly decorate the office. A few mementos that spoke to Williams's extensive service and commitment to his troops. On his desk were framed pictures of him with different units over the years. A moment of pride or achievement in what had obviously been a distinguished career was captured in each picture. After motioning for her to sit in the chair facing his desk, Williams observed her for a few extended moments before continuing. His face was contemplative, not accusing, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that indicated he was searching for something. There were certain clues or signs that would support his thoughts regarding her past. He said, "What you did today was remarkable," in a tone that was deliberately neutral. "The technical skills you displayed. The physical conditioning required to carry Rodriguez 3 miles. The leadership you showed in managing the other recruits. These are not things typically seen in basic training." He paused, allowing his words to settle before continuing. "In fact, they're exactly the kinds of skills we see in our most elite units." Eliza remained silent, her expression attentive, but revealing nothing about her thoughts or reactions to his observations. Years of training had taught her the value of listening more than speaking, especially when dealing with intelligent officers who were skilled at extracting information from reluctant sources. Williams continued his careful probing. "Your file shows that you enlisted directly from civilian life with no prior military service or specialized training. You list your previous occupation as a retail clerk from Nebraska, which seems inconsistent with the capabilities you demonstrated today. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving her face. So, I'm going to ask you directly, Shaw. Is there anything in your background that you haven't disclosed? Any training or experience that might explain what we witnessed? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication and possibility. Eliza knew that her answer would likely determine not only her immediate future, but potentially the success or failure of whatever deeper purpose had brought her to this place. At this time, she could feel the weight of multiple futures balanced on the edge of her next words. Sir, she said carefully, choosing each word with precision, I believe that extreme circumstances can bring out capabilities in people that they didn't know they possessed. Today, I was faced with a situation where a fellow soldier needed help, and I did what I thought was necessary. Her answer was truthful as far as it went, while revealing nothing that could compromise operational security. Williams nodded slowly, recognizing the skill with which she had deflected his question while appearing to answer it completely. That's a very diplomatic response, Shaw. The kind of answer someone gives when they've been trained in operational security and information compartmentalization. His observation was delivered without accusation, but with the recognition of one professional acknowledging another's skills. The silence that followed stretched for several minutes, each of them waiting to see if the other would reveal more than they intended. Finally, Williams leaned back in his chair and smiled slightly, an expression that suggested he had reached some internal conclusion about the Redham situation. You know, he said conversationally, we sometimes get special requests from other units looking for recruits with particular skills or potential. Sometimes these requests come with very specific instructions about how to handle certain individuals. He paused, watching her face for any reaction, and sometimes we're asked to provide opportunities for those individuals to demonstrate their capabilities in realistic scenarios. Eliza felt her heartbeat quicken slightly, though she maintained her calm exterior. Williams's words suggested that today's events might not have been the coincidence they appeared to be, that Rodriguez's collapse might have been orchestrated to create exactly the situation that had unfolded. If true, it meant that her cover had been blown much earlier than she had realized, and that she had been under observation and evaluation for purposes she didn't yet understand. Sir, she said carefully, I'm not sure I understand what you're suggesting. Her response was appropriately confused and innocent. The reaction of someone who had no idea what deeper games might be in play around her. Williams's smile widened slightly. Oh, I think you understand perfectly. Well, Shaw, the question is whether you're ready to acknowledge that understanding. He reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a manila folder that looked suspiciously like a personnel file, though considerably thicker than what should have been necessary for a basic training recruit. This folder contained some very interesting reading, he continued, tapping the manila cover with his finger. His tone was conversational, but the implications of what he said were profound. Records of training courses that officially don't exist, performance evaluations from units that aren't supposed to have recruits, and recommendations from officers whose names are classified above my clearance level. Eliza kept her expression bewildered, while her thoughts whirled through potential answers and their anticipated repercussions. It was useless and possibly harmful to keep up her cover tail if Williams was already aware of her past. However, disclosing too much could jeopardize not only her objective, but also the safety of other agents if this was some sort of fishing expedition. My record should be straightforward, she answered, continuing to project an air of bewildered innocence while buying time to consider the situation. I'm afraid I don't know what you mean, sir. Shaw, or whatever your real name is, we both know that's not true. The question is whether you trust me enough to drop the act and have an honest conversation about why you're really here. Williams laughed softly. I'm just a girl from Nebraska who wanted to serve her country. He opened the manila folder and took a quick look at its contents. Because this file indicates that you are precisely the type of soldier we require for a very specific and crucial assignment. A wave of excitement swept through Eliza's system when she realized that there may be a mission waiting for her, something more than the mundane routine of basic training and the slow discovery of her actual powers. Her training and skills indicated she was destined for more specialized employment, therefore she had been wondering why she had been assigned to such a routine task. What kind of mission are we talking about? She said thoughtfully, assuming for the purposes of argument that you are correct about my history. Although her inquiry was hypothetical in nature, it was obvious that she was open to have a more in-depth discussion. Williams leaned forward, his face growing more concentrated and serious as he closed the folder. The type that calls for someone with your specific set of abilities and the capacity to fully integrate with ordinary cell military troops. The type that may necessitate transporting wounded comrades across hostile area while preserving operational security. Finish the quote. He described a mission that would validate all the years of training and fitness, the exact kind of labor for which she had been prepared. And what would be the next step in this process if I were hypothetically interested in such a mission? Eliza inquired, shedding some of her pretense while retaining plausible deniability. Williams smiled back, this time with sincere approval and warmth. As with other recruits, your next course of action would be to complete basic training, keep up the leadership and skill you displayed today, and wait for additional instructions. Then he stopped, his face growing grave. However, there is one requirement that cannot be altered. Until you are all expressly cleared to do otherwise, you maintain complete operational security regarding this conversation and all subsequent communications. Eliza gave a nod of comprehension, acknowledging the well-known procedures of compartmentalized processes and the necessity of understanding information exchange. I get it, sir, Williams retorted, and the other recruits are still the soldiers you've been for the last 6 weeks. Quiet and capable, but generally unimpressive. Although today's events were remarkable, they should not be seen as a showcase for highly specialized training, but rather as a one-time emergency response. His directions were straightforward and well-known. They were the same type of operational advice she had previously heard in a variety of settings. Eliza was both relieved and excited as she got ready to leave Williams's office. After 6 weeks of careful balance, everything had finally changed, but for a reason that made all the deceit and misdirection worthwhile. She would probably have to use all of her powers rather than conceal them for whatever mission was ahead of her. Williams arrived at the door and said, "One more thing, Shaw. Carrying Rodriguez those 3 miles today required a great deal of bravery and fortitude. That was the behavior of a crazy true soldier, regardless of your level of training." From one fighter to another, his remarks conveyed sincere respect and admiration. As she made her way back to the barracks, Eliza considered what had happened that day and how it would affect her going forward. In a single afternoon, the cautious facade she had upheld for 6 weeks had been completely destroyed. But maybe it was the goal all along. It's possible that Rodriguez's breakdown was deliberately designed to produce the conditions necessary for her to prove her powers while still having a credible excuse to act. When she got back, the other recruits were already getting settled for the night. The unusual occurrences of the day continued to dominate their conversations. A number of them came up to her with inquiries and words of praise, but she diverted the most of the attention with her usual modesty and attention to the teamwork that had enabled the rescue. Those who sought her out included Chun, whose once contemptuous demeanor entirely changed to one of sincere admiration and interest. He replied softly, "I owe you an apology, Shaw," with a sincerity that startled them both. "I made a snap judgment about you solely on appearances and totally failed to see your true potential. That was unjust and uninformed." His statements caused him to face his own prejudices and presumptions about power and aptitude, which marked a dramatic change in his perspective. "We all base our decisions on incomplete information," Eliza said tactfully. "How we react to new information is what counts." She showed maturity and wisdom beyond her apparent years by accepting his apology with grace. Another tiny sign of training and experience that considerably exceeded what most 22-year-olds had. Walsh brought her own inquiries and views to their discussion. She was still processing all she had seen with her analytical mind. "The way you carry Rodriguez through those challenges," she remarked reflectively. It was neither inherent talent nor improvisation. These were reactions that had been learnt via a lot of practice. Her experience competing in sports helped her understand the distinction between innate talent and acquired skill. Eliza's answer was characterized by her lack of commitment. "You may discover reserves you were unaware of while others are counting on you." As far as it went, the statement was accurate, but it cautiously avoided acknowledging the specific training that Wall had rightly pointed out. As the evening wore on and the other recruits slowly became accustomed to their nightly rituals, Eliza couldn't help but think about Rodriguez and his health. She hadn't heard anything about his condition since he was taken to the base hospital, but the medical staff had been competent and effective. Although her worry was legitimate and stemmed from the soldiers' innate protective feeling towards other service members, it was further muddled by the potential that his collapse was planned rather than the result of genuine bravado. News broke the next morning that Rodriguez was making a full recovery from what was determined to be acute heat exhaustion exacerbated by dehydration. Noting that the person who carried him had maintained appropriate placement and monitoring during the trip, the medical team commended the high caliber of care he had received throughout transport. Their expert evaluation confirmed Eliza's behavior while posing further queries regarding her education and background in medicine. At morning formation, Martinez made an appearance with his typical authoritative demeanor. When he spoke to the platoon, however, his manner was different. His tone contained overtones that implied layers of meaning beyond his surface words, and his gaze lingered on Eliza for a few more seconds than normal. To the gathered recruits, he declared, "Yesterday's exercise revealed important things about each of you." He used well-chosen words to acknowledge the extraordinary events without highlighting any one person in particular. Some of you discovered reserves of strength and courage you didn't know you possessed. Others learnt valuable lessons about priorities and the true meaning of military service. Private Shaw, he said, his tone becoming more official. The best traditions of military service were embodied by what you did yesterday. You showed the kind of leadership we want to instill in all of our rebel recruits by putting the needs of a fellow soldier before your own. Both an honor and a burden, the public acknowledgement increased her stature while making it harder for her to keep the quiet profile she desired. Among the other recruits, many of whom had grown to greatly admire the drill sergeant's experience and judgment, Martinez's compliments carried a lot of weight. His statements made Eliza's acts memorable and spoken about long after their basic training was over, turning the events of the previous day from an intriguing aberration into something that was on the verge of becoming legend. Over the next few days, Eliza maintained her training, making another effort to blend in and not bring undue attention to herself. She was now seen differently by the other recruits, who looked to her for leadership in trying circumstances and for counsel and direction on technical issues. Whether she liked it or not, the platoon dynamic had changed radically. Walsh in particular was committed to learning more about Eliza's history and skills. Her growing intuition that her silent buddy was far more complex than had been made public was reflected in the sharpening and sophistication of her questioning. She cornered Eliza during a quick break during an especially difficult obstacle course practice. Walsh muttered, "I've been thinking about what happened during the endurance run, so that no one else could overhear them. Your methods, your evaluation of Rodriguez's condition, and the effectiveness of your maneuvers under pressure all suggest that you have had much specialized training." She spoke with the assurance of someone who, after extensive consideration and analysis, had come to an unavoidable conclusion. Eliza steadily met her stare, understanding that Walsh was a particularly perceptive and persistent questioner due to her analytical intellect and competitive upbringing. "Although I understand your concern, I believe you may be exaggerating the circumstances." She responded with a fluid and well-practiced deflection, the answer of someone used to sidestepping questions without coming across as defensive or evasive. "Perhaps," Walsh said, although it sounded as if she was still not sure. "However, I want you to know that you can rely on me if I'm correct, and you do possess specialized training and experience. I appreciate that you used your abilities to assist Cash Rodriguez, regardless of what exactly brought you here or what your true goal was." Her words contained an offer of secrecy and alliance, the start of what, with the right care, may grow into true friendship. Martinez, who for some reason always managed to show up when delicate subjects were being discussed, interrupted the talk. His arrival instantly changed the atmosphere, making both women focus again on the training exercise and delaying any further investigation into Eliza's past. Eliza found herself balancing the ever-tougher task of keeping her cover, while also fulfilling the demands that her actions during the endurance race had produced. While the drill instructors appeared to be keeping a closer eye on her and putting her in more difficult situations, other recruits looked to her for leadership and direction. She was paired with Kim and Rodriguez during a night navigation exercise. Rodriguez had returned to duty following his hospitalization and appeared sincere in his appreciation of her assistance in saving his life. They had to navigate through uncharted territory with just a map and compass in order to reach a number of checkpoints before dawn while dodging roving patrols' discovery. As they made their way into the darkness, Rodriguez stated softly, "I want to thank you again for what you did," with sincere passion in his voice. According to the expert, prompt medical intervention likely avoided major problems. "I will never be able to pay you back." His appreciation was sincere and intimate. The expression of gratitude from one soldier to another for deeds beyond their call of duty or obligation. Eliza politely said, "Any of us would have done the same thing," but they all knew it wasn't totally accurate. Without pausing, a number of recruits had walked by his position, weighing their duty to assist others against their personal achievement. Not everyone shared the training and values that had motivated her acts. Kim, who who had been listening to their chat while attempting to pass by starlight, contributed his own viewpoint. "Shaw, I don't believe that to be true. Your actions required not only a willingness to assist, but also the technical know-how and physical prowess to be truly successful. Most of us wouldn't have known how to safely move someone Rodriguez's size, even if we'd wanted to help." End quote. His observation was accurate and troubling, highlighting the gap between good intentions and actual capability. The navigation exercise continued through the night with their small team successfully reaching each checkpoint while avoiding the detection patrols that Martinez had positioned throughout the area. Eliza's map reading and compass skills proved exceptional, leading them along routes that minimized exposure while maintaining progress toward their objectives. Her performance was professional and efficient, raising additional questions about where she had acquired such competence. As they approached the final checkpoint just before dawn, they encountered another team that had become lost and was struggling to determine their position. The team leader, a recruit named Foster, who had previously shown little respect for Eliza's quiet demeanor, approached them with obvious reluctance to ask for assistance. "Shaw," he said awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with having to request help from someone he had previously dismissed. He swallowed a great deal of pride when he said, "We're having trouble with our navigation. Could you take a look at our route and maybe point us in the right direction?" Recognition that social dynamics and preconceived conceptions were less important than competence. Eliza swiftly reviewed their compass and map readings, pointing out computation errors and the compounding impact of minor errors over several hours of travel. Her explanation was lucid and educational, assisting them in comprehending not only their blunders but also how to steer clear of them in the future. Both teams were impressed by the teaching moment's kindness and patience. As his squad were ready to move forward towards their goal, Foster remarked earnestly, "Thank you. I suppose I should apologize for some of the things I said earlier. You have far greater potential than I initially gave you credit for." His words echoed similar sentiments from other recruits who had been forced to reassess their initial judgments based on demonstrated performance rather than surface appearances. The successful completion of the night navigation exercise added another layer to Eliza's growing reputation within the training battalion. Word of her navigation skills and willingness to help struggling teammates spread beyond her immediate platoon, creating a network of respect and admiration that made it increasingly difficult to maintain anonymity. Captain Williams seemed pleased with these developments when he encountered her during a routine inspection of training facilities. His brief nod of approval and knowing smile suggested that her growing visibility was not only acceptable, but perhaps part of some larger plan that she didn't yet fully understand. "How are you settling in, Shaw?" he asked casually, his tone suggesting a routine check on recruit welfare, while his eyes conveyed deeper meaning, finding the training challenging enough to keep you engaged. His question carried layers of meaning, asking about both her immediate experience and her readiness for whatever assignments might follow basic training. "Yes, sir," she replied appropriately. "Every day brings new challenges and opportunities to learn." Her response was suitably generic while acknowledging the subtext of his inquiry. The careful dance of communication between them had become more sophisticated as time passed, allowing for increasingly complex exchanges within the bounds of operational security. The conversation was brief and appeared routine to any casual observer, but it left Eliza with a distinct impression that events were building towards some kind of resolution or revelation. The careful balance she had maintained for weeks was becoming increasingly unstable, pushed toward a tipping point by circumstances that seemed both random and orchestrated. Training continued with increasing intensity as the recruits approached the final phase of their basic program. The exercises became more complex and realistic, incorporating elements of combat simulation and teamwork that would prepare them for their eventual assignments within the broader military structure. Eliza's performance remained consistently excellent, though she continued to avoid the kind of spectacular demonstrations that had marked the endurance run. During a final comprehensive exercise that combined multiple skills and scenarios, she found herself appointed as team leader for a group that included Walsh, Chen, Kim, and several other recruits who had come to Balisas. Respect her judgment and capabilities. The assignment was both an honor and a challenge, requiring her to balance leadership responsibilities with her preference for remaining in the background. The exercise scenario involved a simulated rescue mission behind enemy lines, requiring the team to navigate hostile territory, locate and extract friendly personnel, and return to base while avoiding gas or neutralizing opposition forces. The complexity of the mission demanded both individual competence and seamless teamwork, testing everything they had learned during their weeks of training. Eliza's leadership style was collaborative and inclusive, seeking input from team members while maintaining clear authority and decision-making responsibility. Her approach drew on principles and techniques that seemed advanced for someone with her supposed background, further reinforcing the growing conviction among her teammates that there was much more to her story than had been revealed. The mission proceeded smoothly through its initial phases, with the team successfully navigating the insertion point and moving toward their objective without detection. Eliza's tactical awareness and terrain reading skills kept them on efficient routes while avoiding the opposition forces that Martinez had positioned throughout the exercise area. When they reached the simulated crash site where they were supposed to locate and extract friendly personnel, they discovered a scenario more complex than anticipated. The survivors included both ambulatory personnel and seriously injured individuals who would require careful handling and transportation. The situation demanded both medical knowledge and physical capability. Exactly the combination of skills that Eliza had demonstrated during Rodriguez's rescue. "All right, team," she said quietly, assessing the situation while maintaining security. "We have multiple casualties with varying degrees of injury. Walsh and Chin, you establish perimeter security. Kim, you help me assess the injured and prepare them for movement. Foster, you coordinate with the ambulatory survivors to gather intelligence about enemy positions." End quote. Her instructions were clear and professional, reflecting tactical thinking that impressed everyone present. The execution of the extraction proceeded with clockwork precision, each team member performing their assigned role while adapting to changing circumstances and unexpected challenges. Eliza's coordination and decision-making kept the operation moving smoothly, while ensuring that no detail was overlooked or shortcuts taken that might compromise safety or security. When opposition forces finally located their position and initiated contact, the team's response was immediate and coordinated. Eliza's tactical commands were crisp and effective, positioning her people to maximum advantage while ensuring the safety of the personnel they were extracting. Her performance under pressure demonstrated leadership capabilities that seemed far beyond what should have been possible for someone with her stated background. The successful completion of the exercise earned praise from Martinez and the other evaluators, who noted the team's exceptional coordination and Eliza's outstanding leadership under pressure. Their comments were professional and appropriate, but carried undertones that suggested deeper evaluation criteria than mere basic training performance standards. As basic training drew toward its conclusion, Eliza found herself anticipating whatever assignment or revelation awaited her. The careful game of concealment and gradual disclosure had played out over weeks of increasingly complex scenarios, building toward some climax that would finally reveal the true purpose behind her presence at her presence Fort Bradley. Captain Williams provided that revelation during a final individual interview conducted in the same austere office where they had first acknowledged the existence of deeper purposes and hidden agendas. His manner was more relaxed and open than before, suggesting that the time for careful probing and indirect communication had passed. "Your performance throughout basic training has been exemplary," he began without preamble. "More importantly, your demonstrated capabilities align perfectly with the requirements of a special assignment that requires someone with your particular combination of skills and psychological profile." His words finally brought their long game of hints and implications into the open. "The mission involves deep cover insertion into a hostile organization that has been recruiting military personnel for purposes that remain unclear," Williams continued, his tone becoming more serious and focused. "We need someone who can convincingly portray a recent basic training graduate while possessing the advanced skills necessary to gather intelligence and potentially conduct direct action operations." The assignment he described was exactly the kind of work she had been trained for, justifying years of preparation and specialized education. "The cover story you've been living for the past 8 weeks becomes your permanent identity for the duration of the mission," he explained. Eliza Shaw, the quiet girl from Nebraska who surprised everyone by demonstrating extraordinary capabilities under pressure. That narrative provides perfect justification for your selection, while explaining any advanced cult skills you might need to display. The elegant simplicity of the cover story impressed her with its completeness and believability. As Williams outlined the details of her new assignment, Eliza felt the familiar surge of anticipation and purpose that came with receiving a mission worthy of her training and capabilities. The weeks of careful deception and controlled revelation had all been leading to this moment when she could finally apply her skills in service of objectives that mattered. The transformation from Eliza Shaw, basic train recruit, to Eliza Shaw, special operations asset, was complete. Her legend was established, her capabilities demonstrated, and her cover story validated by weeks of carefully observed performance. Whatever challenges awaited her in the field, she was as ready as training and preparation could make her. The quiet girl from Nebraska, who had surprised everyone by carrying a 200-pound Sergeant 3M, had evolved into something far more dangerous and valuable. The laughter of her fellow recruits when she had first stopped running seemed like an echo from another lifetime, a reminder of how completely appearances could deceive and how profoundly circumstances could reveal hidden truths about human potential and purpose. As she prepared to leave Fort Bradley for her new assignment, Eliza reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The careful balance of concealment and revelation, the gradual building of trust and respect among her fellow recruits, and the systematic demonstration of capabilities that seemed impossible for someone with her supposed background had all combined to create the perfect legend for whatever mission lay ahead. The story of the girl who stopped running had become the foundation for something much larger and more important. A testament to the power of preparation, the value of patience, and the ultimate triumph of skill and dedication over assumption and prejudice. Whatever challenges awaited her in the shadows of special operations, she would face them with a confidence that came from knowing she had already proven herself capable of extraordinary things when extraordinary things were required. The final week at Fort Bradley passed with unusual intensity, as if the entire training apparatus had shifted into a higher gear in preparation for graduation and the dispersal of recruits to their permanent ANUS assignments. Eliza found herself the subject of increased attention from multiple sources, ranging from fellow recruits seeking final advice and guidance to instructors who seemed to be conducting informal assessments that went beyond routine training evaluation. Rodriguez, fully recovered from his heat exhaustion and back to his normal duties, made a point of seeking her out during one of the final equipment inspections. His massive frame and intimidating presence had always commanded respect among the recruits. But his interaction with Eliza carried a different quality, marked by genuine gratitude and professional recognition that elevated her status even further among her peers. "Shaw," he said quietly, pulling her aside after the formal inspection had concluded. "I want you to know that what you did out there wasn't just about physical strength or technical skill. It was about character, about who you are when everything is at stake and nobody is paying attention to make sure you do the right thing." End quote. His words carried weight beyond their surface meaning, the assessment of a senior non-commissioned officer who had spent decades evaluating the potential and character of young soldiers. The conversation continued as they walked towards the mess hall. Rodriguez sharing insights about military service that seemed intended as much for guidance as gratitude. "In my 22 years wearing this uniform," he said thoughtfully, "I've seen plenty of soldiers who could perform when they had to, when regulations or peer pressure demanded it, but the ones who really matter, the ones who make the difference when things get desperate. They're the ones who act from internal conviction rather than external pressure." End of quote. In keeping with her usual humility, Eliza took in what he had to say, understanding that his viewpoint included wisdom beyond her specific education and prepared answers. "I was just doing what needed to be done," she said tactfully in response. In such case, any soldier would have made the same decision. Her reaction demonstrated both sincere modesty and a persistent commitment to her cover story, which insisted that her actions had been spontaneous rather than the product of careful planning. Rodriguez grinned knowingly, as if he respected her need to adhere to whatever operational security procedures controlled her behavior, but still seeing through her deflection. "Perhaps," he said in the calm voice of someone who had mastered the art of deciphering official narratives. However, not all soldiers would have been able to carry out that decision. Preparation and training are necessary for what you did, and they don't just happen. As they stepped into the mess hall, where the customary controlled chaos of mealtime served as a cover for their delicate discourse, the ramifications of his words lingered between them. As they went by, other recruits gave Eliza a courteous nod, acknowledging that she was now well established in their training platoon's social order. At the serving queue, Walsh caught them, her analytical mind still trying to piece together Eliza's history and skills. Her belief that her silent teammate was far more complex than had been publicly disclosed had only grown over the last few weeks, and she had increasingly complex notions about what that would entail. "I've been thinking about our conversation from last week," Walsh stated softly, so that those who were not paying close attention could not overhear their debate on specialized training and the difference between innate talent and acquired experience. "I think you might find some of the conclusions I've drawn intriguing." Her voice had the assurance of someone who has used keen observation and reason to solve a particularly difficult riddle. Walsh's statements implied that her cover narrative might be more obvious than she had planned, which made Eliza feel a familiar uneasiness. It had always been difficult to balance openness and concealment in order to maintain operational security, while fostering the connections required for mission accomplishment. In response to questioning about her past, Eliza delicately said, "I'm not sure what you mean. continuing her well-established habit of polite uncertainty. Although she acknowledged that Walsh was a particularly difficult interrogator due to her intelligence and perseverance, the reaction was automatic and well-practiced. Walsh's faint smile conveyed respect and compassion for Eliza's need to adhere to whatever rules restricted her conduct. She said, "I think you understand exactly what I mean. However, I also believe you have valid reasons to exercise caution when sharing information. I want you to know that you have my respect and discretion, regardless of those reasons." The offer of protection and alliance was both gratifying and worrisome, indicating that Walsh's suspicions had grown sufficiently to warrant direct approaches. Eliza realized that she had to decide whether to find a more permanent strategy to divert her increasing curiosity or to trust Walsh with at least some truth. There are always aspects of people's backgrounds that don't make it into official records or casual conversation, Eliza ultimately said, taking a middle ground that recognized Walsh's findings without validating her fears. "I'm sure that's true for everyone here, including you." Her response turned the focus back on Walsh while avoiding direct engagement with the core question. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Chen and Kim, who had apparently been looking for their small group with some urgency. Chen's usual confident demeanor seemed slightly subdued, while Kim appeared more excited than usual, suggesting they brought news of some significance. "You guys need to hear this," Chen said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't being overheard by other recruits or staff. "I just overheard Martinez talking to Captain Williams about special assignments for some of the graduating recruits. They mentioned Shaw by name, along with some kind of classified posting that requires Kai security clearance review." The revelation sent a ripple of excitement and speculation through their small group, each of them processing the implications according to their own understanding and expectations. For Eliza, the news confirmed what she had expected based on her conversation with Williams, while for the others, it provided the first concrete indication that their suspicions about her background might have official by a validation. Kim's excitement was barely contained as he processed the possibilities suggested by Chen's overheard conversation. "That has to be related to what happened during the endurance run," he said enthusiastically. "They must have decided that your performance demonstrated exactly the kind of capabilities they need for whatever the special by assignment involves." His interpretation was logical and entirely consistent with the cover story that had been carefully constructed around her demonstrated abilities. Walsh's reaction was more measured and analytical, her mind already working through the implications of official recognition for skills that shouldn't have existed in someone with Eliza's supposed background. Special assignments requiring security clearance review don't usually go to people based solely on one incident, she observed thoughtfully. There has to be more to the evaluation process than what we've seen publicly. Rodriguez, who had been listening to their conversation with the patient attention of someone accustomed to piecing together incomplete information, added his own perspective based on decades of military experience. "The kind of posting Chun is describing usually involves units that don't advertise their existence or their requirements," he said carefully. "If Shaw is being considered for something like that, it means someone with significant authority has been watching and evaluating her performance throughout training." The implications of his statement created a moment of thoughtful silence among the group, each of them recognizing that they might have been witnessing something much more significant than a routine basic training experience. The careful orchestration of events, the specialized scenarios that had tested specific capabilities, and the growing attention from senior officers all suggested a level of planning and purpose that went far beyond normal recruit development. Eliza found herself balancing multiple considerations as she processed their speculation and observations. The gradual revelation of her true status was proceeding according to plan. But the intelligence and perceptiveness of her fellow recruits was creating complications that required careful management. Her response needed to acknowledge their insights while maintaining the operational security that protected not only her mission but potentially other operations and personnel. "I'm flattered that you all think I might be suitable for special assignments," she said diplomatically. "But I suspect you might be reading more significance into routine administrative processes than actually exists. The military probably evaluates all graduating recruits for various positions based on her eye on demonstrated performance and potential." Her explanation was plausible and deflected attention, while allowing for the possibility that she might indeed receive an unusual assignment. The group's discussion continued as they finished their meal and prepared for the afternoon training session, with each participant contributing observations and theories that demonstrated both their growing sophistication as soldiers and their genuine concern for their teammates' future. The bonds that had formed among them during their shared experiences had evolved into something approaching family relationships with all the complexity and loyalty that such connections entailed. The afternoon brought news that confirmed Chen's overheard intelligence, while adding new dimensions to the developing situation. Captain Williams appeared at their training area with several other officers whom none of the recruits recognized. Their presence suggesting evaluation criteria that went beyond normal basic training assessment protocols. Williams' announcement to the assembled platoon was carefully worded to provide information, while maintaining appropriate operational security. "Several of you have demonstrated exceptional potential during your training here," he said formally. "As a result, you may be contacted regarding opportunities for advanced training and specialized assignments that match your particular capabilities and interests." The announcement created a buzz of excitement and speculation among the recruits, most of whom interpreted it as validation of their hard work and developing military competence. For Eliza, the public acknowledgement represented another step in the carefully orchestrated process of transitioning from her cover identity to her operational assignment. Following the formal announcement, Williams approached Eliza with instructions that were presented as routine administrative requirements, but clearly carried deeper significance. "Private Shaw," he said formally, "report to Building 7 at 1,400 hours for additional processing and briefing regarding your post-graduation assignment." His tone was appropriately official, while his eyes conveyed the understanding that had developed between them over the preceding weeks. The instruction to report for special briefing confirmed what everyone in their small group had suspected, while raising new questions about the nature and scope of whatever assignment awaited her. Building 7 was known among the recruits as the location where classified activities took place, making it an appropriately mysterious destination for someone whose background and capabilities remained largely unknown. Walsh, Chun, Kim, and Rodriguez gathered around Eliza after Williams had departed, their expressions mixing excitement for her opportunity with concern about what her special assignment might mean for their group, dynamic, and future relationships. The prospect of separation after weeks of shared challenges and growing friendship created emotional complexity that none of them had fully anticipated. "Whatever this assignment turns out to be," Walsh said seriously, "I want you to know that having you as part of our team has made all of us better soldiers."